Hey there, Agile Dust Devils, and welcome to another episode of Agile Bytes, the podcast sponsored by Integrity Inspired Solutions, where we build software in an agile manner day in and day out. You know, we have been talking recently about some sort of foundational thoughts for managers of development teams or entire software development operations to think about. As you are embarking on this journey of managing teams, or maybe you've been managing developer teams for some time, we know that when teams are increasing in their agility, sometimes this can create tensions with the people who manage them. Sometimes these tensions are just part of the normal process of growing into greater agility, but sometimes these tensions are not necessary. They are not journeys you need to go through. You just go through them because there are things that fall through kind of on both sides of the fence. So today what I want to talk about is I want you to pretend that you are very, very early on in your new management job. You're managing software development teams, maybe a specific team, maybe a group of teams, maybe you're over the entire software development operations of your organization. You know, maybe you're even sitting in like a CIO or a CTO position. And let's say you just got here. Now, what's interesting is for some of you, this may be literally the case, right? You might literally have just gotten into this position, but I want you to at least imagine it because I want you to kind of enter into that mindset. Okay. I want you to come into this not thinking about solutions and directions and visions you already have in your backpack to bring to these teams. Okay, so you're coming into these teams, it's day one. Well, maybe not day one because, you know, usually days 1 through 5 are you working with IT to get set up in their payroll system and, you know, get your computer going and filling out all the forms and things like that. So maybe it's more like day 6 or something like that, but it's pretty early on, right? So you have these people. What are the first things that you do? Do you have a big meeting where you outline your vision for the department? Do you start out with a list of changes that you would like to make and begin to socialize those? There's a lot of things you could be doing, but I'm going to make a recommendation. And my recommendation is that today, our first day on the job, we're going to be asking a lot of questions. Why being prominent among those questions? And there's a few reasons for it. But before I get into that, I do want to say that when you are coming in from the outside, like let's say you are a new manager, you know, maybe you were promoted from within and everybody knows you, that's fine, but you are now interacting with them in a brand new dynamic. It's a brand new power dynamic. And if you were hired in from the outside, then these people don't even know you. So you have that dynamic in place already. The reason this is important is because when somebody in power starts asking you why you're doing this or why you're doing that, it's very, very common for the people who are being asked that question to react defensively. Because when somebody in power is asking you, why did you do that? There's almost it's almost like it's a prelude to getting chewed out, right? There's almost an intimation that I've done something wrong. Otherwise, why would my manager be questioning this? Now, I don't think that implication is real. Like, I don't think when most people ask that, that's what they mean. I'm asking you why you did this because I think you did it wrong. And I can't wait to hear your goofy justification for whatever this boneheaded thing was that you did. I don't think that's where most people are coming from when they ask that. But because of the power dynamic differential, has that flavor to it. And so you really have to be careful with these questions. You should be asking a lot of them, but you kind of want to pace yourself. You really want to watch your tone of voice, watch your body language. You might even want to explicitly address it. You know, like, hey, I know all these questions make it sound like I'm gearing up for a criticism, but I'm really not. I'm just trying to understand. I'm trying to get the lay of the land, and I think you're the best people to give it to me. But what we're trying to do when we are asking these questions on the first day is, prior to making recommendations, we want to understand what the facts are that have brought this situation into being. And we also want to understand the reasons why the status quo is the way it is. You know, a lot of times managers, they get put into this position. They're driven, they're ambitious, they got big plans. Maybe even they told the person hiring them, here's all the things that I can bring to your organization, and they are ready to go. and they come in with solutions and they come in with recommendations. The problem with that is you don't know the reality on the ground that you're facing. You're bringing these recommendations and this vision in with no context. You're bringing it in from a vacuum. And if you're going to be effective in implementing those things, you first need to do some reconnaissance. You first need to gather some intelligence, see what you're dealing with. What's the situation on the ground? What are the teams currently doing? What are they currently experiencing? And more importantly, why is that the case? You want to do this partially because you may discover that there's very good reasons why the teams are doing things that you don't think they should be doing, right? Or why operations is operating in a way different than it did at the place you used to work, or what you read in the book that software operations is supposed to look like. There may be very, very good reasons why they're doing what they're doing, but you don't know it unless they tell you. You know, I am a developer amongst other things, and when I'm writing code, sometimes, depending on the specific organization's context, I have to do something weird in code. I mean, sometimes I have to do something weird in person too, but I'm talking about in code. I have to do something a developer who's at the top of their game probably would not do, right? Something suboptimal. And whenever that happens, I always leave a comment. It's about the only time I'll leave a comment in code. And it usually goes something like, when you see this, you would probably want to refactor it to work this way, but you can't because, you know, there's this legacy registry setting, or, you know, the AS400 randomly explodes every 5 minutes or something like that. Something about the context that makes the weird thing make sense, right? Because somebody coming into it won't know that. So that's part of what you're trying to do. All these things that you are observing that teams are doing and the outcomes of the things that they're doing, you have no context for those things. So you want to get them because they will reveal that sometimes there are reasons why things look the way they do. Now, you may also discover that the reasons may not be great, but that points to an underlying cause that you should be focused on, as opposed to like the specific practice or the specific team or the specific thing, you know, that you're observing. So let's say, for example, that you have a team and, you know, maybe they're doing Scrum, and every sprint they have lots of work left over that they really wanted to get done in order to accomplish their sprint goal. And this just keeps happening, right? Over and over and over again. Well, somebody might see that and be like, okay, well, it's obviously the artificial construct of the time box is hampering this team. They need longer to finish their work. So everybody, our sprint should be 3 weeks long now, or a month long. Or let's quit doing sprints, let's do Kanban, and then we won't have the time box, and then we won't have this problem, you know, all this work not being done by the end of the sprint. Are you solving the right problem, though? Maybe, but probably not. Probably there's an underlying cause. There's a reason why the team keeps picking these sprint goals and forming sprint backlogs around them that consistently are overstepping their capacity. Maybe the underlying issue is the team doesn't have a good understanding of sprint goals. Maybe the team doesn't even have sprint goals, but they have sprints. Or maybe their sprint goals are get all the work done that the product owner said we needed to get done in the sprint. You know, there's underlying causes that if you just jump in to solve the problem, you might be solving the wrong problem, right? And by asking these questions first, then you will begin to find these underlying causes, and that may redirect your attention and your suggestions. I would say that this is true, especially not just for managers, but for Agile coaches, for Scrum masters. Anytime you're coming into a team and it's going to be your role to help them grow into better practice or higher agility or leaner operations, you don't want to come in telling them, okay, we got to have WIP limits here. We got to have, you know, a Kanban board. We got to have retrospectives or whatever. Instead of coming in guns blazing, we need to first take into account, why do things look the way they do? And part of it is because maybe it has to, or maybe there's something else that really needs fixing, and this is just a symptom, it's just a side effect. But the other reason you want to ask is because you are laying the foundation for future discussions, because what you will find is a lot of the time there is no reason, or the reason isn't very good, right? The cost isn't worth the value, right? Or maybe at one time the reason was valid, but those circumstances are no longer applicable, but the team continues to operate as if they are. This is something I find all the time, whether we're talking about the code base or whether we're talking about operations, the process, the team or the code or their practices or whatever will look a certain way because 5 years ago, there was something that sort of drove them to look a certain way. And those things are just not the case anymore. Maybe they did a certain thing because they had this big legacy monolith, but now they don't have that anymore. Now they've broken things out into microservices, but their process still looks like they're building a monolith, right? You'll find that a lot of times that teams will inherit code bases, they will inherit architecture patterns, they will inherit ways of working that possibly might have made sense in the distant past, but don't really make sense anymore. And you need to gather that information. You need to have that intelligence, not so you can beat them over the head with it at that time, but later, when you start to circle around back to these issues, now you have that in your back pocket, right? I would like to revisit something we talked about a month ago, you might say. When I asked why we were structuring projects this way, you said it was because, we used to have 8 different teams working on this product. Well, now we only have 1 team working on this product. So I'm just curious, do we need to keep doing it this way? Now, I'm not saying we should do it a different way, but is it possible that we should at least be thinking about it? Are we at least open to doing it a different way, considering that the reason for doing it this way no longer applies, right? Or considering that nobody knows why we're doing it this way. It's giving you a fertile soil to grow a healthy discussion down the road. So that's another reason why we need to be gathering all this intelligence. And then when you start having those later discussions, you can start talking about the reason as opposed to the practice. Because let's say a team is doing Kanban and you come in and you're like, okay, Kanban is just causing us a lot of problems. Let's do Scrum, or let's do Scrum and Kanban together, or whatever your thing is. Well, instantly, the team that has been working in that way, they're going to resent you doing that. They're not going to want to change, and they're sure not going to want to change just because somebody who's not even on their team comes in and tells them to. I don't care what your position is, right? But if instead of having a conversation about, hey, I think we should be using some other methodology or framework, and instead you can start talking about the reasons and the circumstances that led them to that decision to begin with, that's a very different conversation. That's a thought-provoking conversation. That is the kind of conversation that occasions self-critique as teams begin to reflect on their own practices and their own decisions and think, well, yeah, gosh, I don't know that we really have a good reason for doing things that the way we've got right now. And once we have all come to that conclusion, that's when we can start advancing things like, well, if we don't have a particular reason why it has to be this way, then is it possible that we could change it if we wanted to, right? Not that we're going to. I'm not bringing a solution, but I'm just saying, are we all kind of in agreement that if these reasons no longer apply, or we don't have a reason, or these reasons were probably not that great to begin with, are we at least available? Are we open to changing? Is that a possibility? And let's move into that space, right, before we start talking about solutioning and our vision and our great ideas. And as we have those conversations, then we can work our way up from there, right? I do not subscribe to a theory of leadership that says you should never tell people what to do, or at least never make recommendations. I don't subscribe to a theory that says you shouldn't solve problems, or you shouldn't help teams solve problems, or you shouldn't give advice, or you shouldn't talk about your own experiences and what you've done in the past that worked well for you. I think you should be doing all those things. I think Scrum Masters should do them. I think Agile coaches should do all those things. I think managers should be doing all those things. But the trick is you can't come in starting there, right? You have to first understand what you're dealing with, because that will provide the foundation for those first conversations, those first probing, questioning conversations where you're not even moving people to a particular solution. You just want to get them to a place where they are agreeing with you that, yeah, there's no reason why it has to be this way. So it doesn't have to be this way. And once everyone has kind of gotten used to the fact that, hey, it doesn't have to be this way, well, now you can start having collaborative conversations with your teams about changing them. Again, the people who are doing the work are the best people to decide how the work should be done, the vast majority of the time. That is a great time to start saying like, well, have you guys ever looked into this? Or this is something we did in my last organization and it worked pretty well. Do you want to try it? Or what do you think about it? Or, now you are all in the same boat. Now you are all dealing with a common frame of reference for reality because you took the time to ask the questions, to gather the information, to dig a little bit deeper on the why and get everybody's whys and reasons. And now you are talking about that on a pathway to get to conversations where you and your teams can collaborate around changes and collaborate around solutions and ultimately get around to the things that you hoped you would accomplish with your teams. So what are some things you could ask about? And there's not like a definitive list, right? It's you're new, right? You're coming to this job brand new, day one. Here's some things you could ask about. If you're just staring at a blank sheet of paper and you don't know where to go, one of the things you can ask is, how are we currently visualizing or keeping track of work that's currently going on? Do we have boards up with items on them? Are people working off of lists? Are these things available to everyone? Are they only available with the team? Are we all using Jira? Is it hard to find these things? Do I have to click through 5 different screens before I can see what anyone is working on, or a team member can see what their work is for the day? What's going on around that? How are we visualizing work or seeing it? And why is it that way? Why did we decide to do it that way? Who picked that tool? Or what did we do in the past and why did we quit doing it? Just that information gathering around that. And a related question, you might ask, how does anybody know what anybody else is working on? Does anybody know? Is that even relevant to the way your team works? Do you talk about it in a daily stand-up? Do you have it on a visible board that's an information radiator? Does nobody really know? Or worse yet, does a manager know, but nobody else does? And all of this exists in a manager's head, right? So ask about that, get the reality on the ground, and then maybe you can start moving toward less risky solutions. Another question I like to ask is, how do people get their work, right? How do they know what to work on next? Do they pull from a board as an individual? Do they talk as a team about who's going to work on what? Does somebody assign it to them? When they get done with their work item, do they go to somebody and say, okay, I'm ready for more work, and that somebody gives them more work? Does somebody stick their name on it in Jira, whether they volunteered for it or not? How does this happen? That is a very fruitful question I found, because it begins to really get into some of the underlying potential dysfunctions that are going on in the organization that you could optimize. What's the process to get something from a request all the way into production? Or another way to ask that, what is the process from getting something from a developer's machine into the production server? What are all the different stages that it has to go through? All the different checkpoints? What are the processes? Are we using some form of Git for source control? Are we using PRs? Are we doing branching and merging? Do we have a CD pipeline? Do we, zip up all the folders and copy them over to the next server? How does something go from this is work that we need to get done to something that's working into production? And, diagram that out for yourself. If it's not diagrammed out anywhere else, ask your team, is this diagram right? Am I missing anything? Because what you're doing is you're kind of getting close to your value stream. And when you can see that stream, then all of a sudden, places you can look at for efficiencies can begin to suggest themselves. Like we have all of our PRs get approved by our single senior developer. What was the reason behind that? Were a bunch of bugs getting into production? Yeah, a bunch of bugs were getting into production. Okay, so the underlying issue is really bugs are getting into production. Why was that happening? And why is this the best way to deal with it, to establish this bottleneck? You start finding things in the process that you can start asking more questions about. I also like to ask, Are there parties outside of the team that the team has some dependency on, especially within the realm of someone checking them or approving their work or something like that? Are there architects outside the team that are architecting things for the team and the team has to wait on them? Is there a UX person who's doing designs and mock-ups that they hand over to the team that the team has to deal with? Is there a committee or a senior developer or a person who has to look over everything the team did and review their code and approve or reject whatever they did? Find those kinds of things. Is there a committee that decides, what a team should be working on and whether it's good enough or not, or whether a change can be made? Because again, the more of these you find, the more potential inefficiencies there are, and the more things that you can have more detailed conversations about. Why is this part of the process? When did it start? Has it always been this way? What happened that this was in response to? And a lot of times you'll find a lot of this stuff was just set up because somebody thought it needed to be that way, not because there was any actual event or any actual problem they were trying to solve. I like to ask, what metrics are we currently keeping around development and delivery, if we're keeping any at all? What is the way that teams improve the way they work? Do they have retrospectives? Do they kind of talk about it on the fly? Do they not talk about this at all? Is anybody talking about this? Are there any improvement initiatives? And what do they look like? Do all improvement initiatives come from the top down? What does this look like? How does this happen? Does it happen? These are all good questions, and these are just starters, right? Any of these questions then begin to open up answers that you can ask more questions about and more questions about to really get a full picture of how your teams are working, how their priorities are set, who the players are when it comes to getting work done or sending work into the system. These are all good things for you to have a map of and to have your arms around before you start coming in guns blazing with things that you want to get done, initiatives you want to get done, or things that you want to change. You also have to deal with the fact that this process could take weeks. It's not like you can spend a couple of days, go around interviewing people, and then you're done, right? A lot of these are in-depth questions, and different people will have different pieces of this puzzle, right? And to get even one of these questions answered, you may have to talk to 3 or 5 different people or 2 or 3 different teams to really put together the full picture of what's going on. But be okay with that. It's okay, because as you are asking these questions, a few different things are happening. One is obviously you're gathering information to use as a foundation for further discussions. But another thing that's happening is just the act of asking those questions provokes reflection. Assuming that you're doing it in a diplomatic and safe way, teams will start to think about this for themselves. Other managers and department heads and architects and review boards, and they'll start thinking about these things themselves. Like, yeah, it's been a long time since anyone has asked me why we did this. And yeah, I don't know, and they will begin to question things. And now you are really getting into the same boat because they are starting to question the status quo along with you. And now you are taking these people with you in your visionary journey, as opposed to you imposing it on them and then drawing a defensive reaction. But the other thing you're doing too is you are building credibility and safety with your team. You are not coming in guns blazing. You are not coming in with a laundry list of things that are wrong with them. Instead, you are asking questions. You are being curious. And the questions that you are asking show not only do you care at a pretty deep level, but that you are knowledgeable at a pretty deep level. Only people who really have an in-depth desire to understand the operations of a software development organization are going to be asking questions like this and really care about them. And when people begin to answer your questions and nothing bad happens, it's like, oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that. Okay, well, here's what I heard. Did I get that right? Yeah, you got that right. Oh, okay, well, thank you so much. Now you're beginning to build trust and you're beginning to build safety. You're beginning to build credibility so that when you start having the more challenging conversations, when you start pushing back on the status quo, or when you start giving recommendations against the status quo, you are coming from a position of a trusted, safe advisor and not a bungee cord manager who just flies in, changes a bunch of stuff, and then flies out after a year, right? So I hope this is helpful for you. If you're an Agile coach or a Scrum Master, I think a lot of these same things apply. if you're new in your management journey, or maybe you're not. Maybe you've been doing it for a long time and you've just thought, you know what? I've just kind of been handing down directives, but I've never really stopped question why we do things the way they do. I've just kind of been a cog in the system, as opposed to someone who sort of stands outside the system and questions it and brings other people into that questioning frame of mind too. Because once you can do that, then you've created some buy-in and you've created a safe environment where now you can start gearing up your operations for change. Thanks everyone for listening to Agile Bites. Agile does sometimes bite, but we don't think it always has to. If you enjoyed what you heard today, don't forget to like and subscribe to this podcast on whatever platform you happen to be using. And if you can, leave us a comment, because we'd love to hear your feedback. What things would you like to hear about? What things did you hear that were valuable to you today? You can also head over to integrityinspired.com to sign up to our email list. But that's all for today, folks. We'll see you next time.